So the USSR. The video is about allocative efficiency, but via the example of the former Soviet Union. So to provide some context, the USSR was a planned or command economy, which means the government believed they were the most suited at allocating resources. After overthrowing the centuries-old Romanov monarchy, Russia emerged from a civil war in 1921 as a newly formed Soviet Union. Occupying one-sixth of the US land surface, it is considered one of the biggest and most powerful nations in the world. USSR was formed of 15 Soviet republics. Power in 1924. His dictatorship ruled by terror with a series of brutal policies, and he transformed the Soviet Union from an agrarian society to an industrial and military superpower. So between 1928 and 1949, Stalin reformed the collectivization of the agricultural sector. Rural peasants were forced to join collective farms. Those that owned land or livestock were stripped of their holdings. And his belief was that consolidating individually owned farms into a series of large sector-run collective farms would increase agricultural productivity. So it's a prime example of this form of communism. So when we consider a command or a planned economy, or those that are described as communist states, there are some characteristics which make it very different to a mixed and especially a free market economy. So industries owned and managed by the government, they aim to provide more equitable distribution of resources, and they try to allocate all resources, even labour. So in, for example, a planned economy, everybody should have a job. The government will set price controls and have complete control as to how much people pay for certain goods and services. And like I said before, they allocate all resources within the economy because they believe that they are the best suited to do so. However, due to all of this, there is often a big argument about the lack of efficiency which takes place in the economy. So, for example, the economy would lack dynamic efficiency as there wouldn't be that incentive to boost research and development, as there's a little focus on profit. In fact, a CIA report focusing on the technological gap between the USSR and the US during the 60s found this gap to be very, very significant. And it was getting greater and greater. So they're not shared in the post-World War II technological revolution to the same extent as the US and Western Europe. And the CIA reported that as long as the USSR continued to preserve all of the essentials of the present system of planning, this gap would be even greater. So within this video, the next point, we're going to explore much more, but there's often shortages as well, meaning less choice for its citizens. But there's also a restriction on freedom as well. In fact, the USSR restricted many imports of customer goods, and in fact, for some time, Pepsi was the only American brand to be sold. So at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that the major focus was on allocative inefficiency, but to understand that, we need to know what allocative efficiency is. So when we experience allocative efficiency, it's when there is optimal distribution of goods and services, and it's considering consumers' preference within that. So it's an output level where the price equals the marginal cost of production, and this is because the price that consumers are willing to pay has to be equivalent to the marginal utility that they get. So when we're concerned about the USSR, we have to take into consideration that the fact that it's a planned economy and the government were responsible for allocating resources. Did they do that based on consumer preference? So, as I mentioned about Stalin and his decision to further allocate resources towards military, it's worth pointing out the amount of military conflict which the USSR experienced. So if you think about the World War II, if you think about the Cold War, the Berlin blockage, the Hungarian Revolution, just to name a few, there had many tensions with countries such as China and Finland, and they allocated a lot of resources towards the military. However, considering the concept of scarcity, especially in relation to factors of production, we should consider that to utilise more investment in military weapons, allocating labour towards military rather than other industries and so on, it meant that there'd be an opportunity cost. So if we consider the PPF and think about the production of either military weapons or consumer goods, and by allocating more resources towards military weapons, example, moving to point B, there would be a trade-off between consumer goods, which might not be in society's interest, not matching their customer preference. So since the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union devoted between 15 and 17% of its annual gross national product to military spending. And according to US government sources, the defence took the lion's share of high-grade scientific and technical talent. Now, that technical talent, it could have gone, for example, towards consumer goods or other industries which could have perhaps been more beneficial to society. They exceeded US expenditure each year since 1971 and amounted to about $93 billion in dollars in 1974. So a CIA report which analysed the Soviet Union's economy with regards to expenditure commented that throughout its history, the USSR had focused development on war-supported industries to the neglect of consumer-related production. So this resulted in it being what's known as a dual economy, meaning a relatively efficient heavy industrial sector standing alongside a relatively inefficient consumer sector. Ultimately, meaning that the most important elements of consumption, such as food and other farm products, were pretty much dogged by the inefficiency of collectivization. So the following video will demonstrate the experiences of consumers when shopping for essential goods and the shortages that they had to suffer. It further found that the Soviet diet did not meet consumer demand for quality food or for greater variety. So providing more meat and other quality products such as dairy products and fresh fruit had been a major focus to consumer welfare. However, food availability, the quality of the diet and leadership handling of food had important implications for social stability. The queuing experienced by customers and the shortages of meat, milk and other products symbolised and heightened the sense of stringency arising from their general economic slowdown. There was civil unrest with strike action related to food shortages, and this was further worsened by General Secretaries Andropov and Shenenko's rationing of meat. So, considering the shortages, the lack of choice, the quality of important consumer goods such as food, clearly the government's planning of the economy was not allocatively efficient. When it spent on military, they did not consider consumer preference, and this movement from point A to point B was not allocatively efficient.